there's something to be said with celebrity. First of all, the fascination with celebrity. We like to build them up to tear them down.
And that's the premise for the newest Diddy documentary. TMZ presents The Downfall of Diddy. In it, a laundry list of bombshell revelations no one saw coming.
I have no question in my mind that this is going to be the end of Diddy as we know him. I can't see how he gets out of this. I just can't.
We're taking a look at the top 8 reveals from the downfall of Diddy and what all this means for the disgraced celebrity.
Since he was Sean Combs' Puff Daddy, people have been talking about him.
As highlighted in the downfall of Diddy, there have been rumblings for years about Diddy's wrongdoings. We asked California-based entertainment attorney Mitra Ohorian about this.
There's been such an undercurrent of people in the entertainment industry sort of knowing about some of this or knowing rumors. So my initial sense is it's a long time coming. And why now? And the why now is, of course, following on the slew of lawsuits in New York. I believe there were 5 of them, one of which settled very publicly, against people who alleged that he sexually abused them. And this was allowed because of the New York Survivors Act that extended the statute of limitations from 5 years to 20 years. So you could go all the way back. And so you had a lot of adult survivors coming in, filing civil lawsuits. And I think because of some of those allegations, I mean, these, they're very wild allegations, that it sort of opened the door to criminal investigation. And then I think that's when everything sort of blew up and everyone has an opinion about this.
This is a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge. Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their incognito browser. If you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions at incognitoclaims.com/LCnews. As Mitra pointed out, things really came to a head for Diddy last November when his ex, singer Cassie, filed a civil suit against him, making some shocking revelations, including that Diddy raped her, drugged her, beat her, forced her to have sex with prostitutes, and even recorded it. The lawsuit was settled one day after it was filed, but the damage had already been done. Cassie's lawsuit opened the floodgates, and soon 3 additional lawsuits emerged. Joy Dickerson-Neal, Liza Gardner, and a woman identifying herself only as Jane Doe all filed civil suits against Diddy last fall, alleging he raped each one of them. Some of the allegations date as far back as 1990. These lawsuits were all filed under the New York Survivors Act, allowing victims of sexual assault to file civil suits against their alleged abusers, even if the statute of limitations had expired. All 4 of these incidents happened in the early 90s or early 2000s, but another suit alleges recent wrongdoing on Diddy's part. Producer Rodney Jones, also known as Lil Rod, slammed Diddy with a civil suit in February of this year, alleging Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced him to have sex with prostitutes. But Lil Rod's lawsuit went a little further than the others, also alleging Diddy's the mastermind behind a sex trafficking, gun trafficking, and drug trafficking venture. Then, on March 25th, federal search warrants were executed at 2 of Diddy's properties. No criminal charges have been filed against him, but some experts say that's a near certainty. But Mitra says these rumblings go much farther back than any of the recent suits filed against Diddy. You had mentioned that this is something people had been talking about for a while. Is this industry talk, so to speak, that this had always been rumors about P. Diddy?
I think industry talk, there's a lot of people who, who have worked for him. There's been stories around, which is, not necessarily unusual for, for somebody who's that big in the entertainment industry and music and film. You kind of get, and particularly musicians, it almost feels like they get away with a lot of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll culture. With Diddy particularly, there's been other, something beyond that, really, that's always been rumored. And then there's been sort of these allegations of violence throughout the years, really dating back to, the Tupac, Biggie, that era, they were all in a culture that was very specific and very different from where things are now. I think things, in a sense, have sort of calmed down, at least in the mainstream hip hop community. But back then, it was very much, this element of violence was very much part of that culture. And I think that with everything that was surrounding that, it's not just the entertainment community, but there are people who work in the entertainment community. There are people who are, tangentially part of the entertainment community. So it's just when you're in a metropolitan area, and I think New York is sort of the same, you do have stories that are, first and second hand, that isn't necessarily something that's whispered about, but just, somebody might hear something from a friend.
One friend of Diddy that has been outspoken is rapper Mark Curry, who appeared both in the doc and right here on Law&Crime. In the downfall of Diddy, Mark alleged there were some 250 cameras inside Diddy's homes, saying investigators have, quote, a whole bunch of images or footage of things that were going on in his house. This echoes something we heard in Lil Rod's suit when he alleged Diddy had hundreds of hours of video and audio recordings showing illegal activity. And it's probably those recordings that federal investigators were after during the raids of Diddy's homes. Here's former prosecutor Melba Pearson.
In reading Little Rod's lawsuit, now we're getting into drug use, we're getting into drug trafficking, we're getting into mules, we're getting into pink cocaine. Who knew? And so you're hearing and seeing all of these other allegations that now the feds can be like, okay, now I know I need to look for surveillance tapes. Now I need to look for this aspect.
When we spoke to Mark Curry, he didn't mention any hidden cameras, but instead let loose about Diddy's character.
Is he controlling? Yes, he is. Will he put his hands on a female? Yes, he will. Would he put his hands on a male producer or anything? Yes, he will. I know those things about him because Puff doesn't have to force anyone to do anything because it's enough people who would just do anything just to be associated with him. So to be affiliated with him. So his life is so easy. To me, he's a person with no empathy, and he doesn't feel as if he has to answer to anything in life because, the power of money sometimes make people they feel powerful because they are able and they have money.
Speaking of which, that leads us into our next bombshell from the downfall of Diddy, that someone originally slated to be part of the doc backed out last minute for fear of Diddy's retaliation. The person, who obviously was not identified, gave an explanation, writing, quote, "I'm worried Diddy has many enemies. I am afraid that if I give my thoughts on what I experienced, I may be ruled a target. I'm still on his side as far as my experience. His enemies may come after me. East Coast versus West Coast still exists." But shockingly, a West Coast rapper, Suge Knight, has been outspoken about Diddy. Now, this rivalry dates back to the mid-90s, and Diddy finds himself center stage in this disagreement. The rivalry is primarily between the New York-based label Bad Boy Records and the Los Angeles-based label Death Row Records. On the East Coast, we find the Notorious B.I.G. and Diddy. Remember, Diddy founded Bad Boy Records back in 1993. On the West Coast, there was Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight, whose comments appeared in the documentary. He's currently serving a 28-year prison sentence after pleading no contest to voluntary manslaughter. Speaking out from prison after the raids of Diddy's homes, he said, quote, "My first reaction, it's not the reaction I thought I'd had when it come to Puffy. The first thing came to my mind was, he has sons, he has daughters. My reaction was first about the kids. And the thing is, I feel it's a bad day for hip hop. It's a bad day for the culture because it makes us all look bad." If that statement wasn't a surprise enough, so too was the lack of response from some of Diddy's closest friends and associates. I asked criminal defense attorney Mike Korbanix about this.
Well, I think it's probably because they are celebrities. This is being put over the media, all aspects of the media, whether it's Instagram or television or in a newspaper, like an old school newspaper they actually read. People are discussing it and it's getting out there and it's traveling. And I think some people don't want to have their reputation damaged by saying, well, if you hung out with him, you must have been doing stuff with him and you must know stuff about it. So I think people are just trying to take a step back before they take a step forward to see what direction they should go.
The downfall of Diddy touches on this too, that people like LeBron James, Eddie Murphy, Justin Bieber, Naomi Campbell, and Ashton Kutcher, Diddy's longtime friends, have all stayed silent. Ashton's relationship with Diddy goes back to the early aughts, but according to a source that spoke with the Daily Mail, regardless of Ashton's long history with him, he has distanced himself from Diddy since Cassie's lawsuit, and even more so in the wake of the new ones. Mila, Ashton's wife, will not let Ashton be in any sort of contact. Then there's Mary J. Blige, a Bad Boy Records artist. She hasn't blatantly spoken out about Diddy, but did make a cryptic Instagram post the day of the federal raids. Her post reads, quote, "Unfortunately, a lot of you all met me when I lacked boundaries and was a people pleaser. Let me reintroduce myself. I burn bridges as needed." We have so many people who are stepping back from Diddy, from celebrities to business associates and partners, without any charges filed. Is it overkill for what they're doing, stepping away and no longer working with him?
That's a difficult question to answer. And it's a difficult question to answer because not everybody knows what the motivation is of people who are stepping away. People could be stepping away for another reason and just using this as an excuse to get out of something they weren't happy with before and doing things of that nature. So it's difficult. And like you said, it's very unusual when a case takes this long when you hear about it. But most of the cases we really hear about are state cases where people are arrested and the charges are done. Federal cases is not unusual for years to go on of investigation. I mean, we've witnessed it in political things. We're seeing it with celebrities where you hear about the investigation and it's like quiet for a couple months, then everything happens for a couple months, then it's quiet again. So it's just very difficult as to where they're going. Because another thing could be, just because something's taking long doesn't mean he's guilty. It could mean they're having trouble finding evidence and that their investigation is not going as smoothly as they thought it was, and it's taking more time. So there's both sides to all those arguments without more facts.
Another bombshell came in the way of Diddy's former artist, Aubrey DDay.
The things that were happening to me at 17 years old on making the band that everybody turned a blind eye to. Insane.
Aubrey DDay rose to fame in 2004 when she first appeared on MTV's Making the Band 3. It was a hands-on project with Diddy himself, who became her professional mentor. DDay and others eventually formed the girl group Danity Kane, and in 2005 signed with Diddy's Bad Boy Records. Danity Kane had multiple songs debut on the Billboard Hot 100 and even became the first all-female group to have their first 2 albums chart. Appearing in the Downfall of Diddy documentary, Aubrey alleged she was groomed while working with Diddy and that she was abused. She said, quote, "I've been in physically abusive situations and the verbal ones hurt me way more. The abuse was significant enough to change the course of my life. On Making the Band alone, we experienced intimidation tactics, body shaming, beatdowns, and then we thought we were absolutely nothing." This echoes a similar statement Aubrey made while appearing on the Barstool Sports show Only Stands in 2023.
Do you know how many abuses that I've faced at the biggest corporations running this country? I could say things right now that would tie me up legally for the rest of my life.
I asked Mike what all these allegations mean in terms of a federal investigation. So is it possible that investigators are now reaching out to her, especially since she's been so outspoken?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's another thing is, and people will look at it saying, well, why, if someone was sexually assaulted, a lot of people's first inclination is why did it take so long for them to report it? However, that's sort of something people need to look at a little further because there's quite a bit of evidence, scientific evidence, and things like that, how psychologically people who are victims of sexual assaults don't always come forth with it because they sort of hope to put it behind them. But then there comes a certain point in time where there's a break. And we're seeing it more now because I believe it's more acceptable and people are more understanding of that situation where people have delayed to report something of that nature.
The Downfall of Diddy talks about who's talking and who's not, and also the players behind the defendants and plaintiffs. In the case of plaintiff Lil Rod, that's attorney Tyrone Blackburn, who is at the center of the next revelation. Experts said Blackburn is, quote, under the microscope of a federal disciplinary committee in New York. And it's not the first time he's gotten pushback. Just last month, New York Judge Denise Cote said, quote, a reasonable inference from Blackburn's pattern of behavior is that he improperly files cases in federal court to garner media attention, embarrass defendants with salacious allegations, and pressure defendants to settle quickly. So is a quick settlement something we can expect from Diddy in the case of Lil Rod? I asked attorney Alan Sash about this. I'm wondering about this case as well. Is this something that Diddy should be settling, or he should be motioning to dismiss? What would you recommend?
That's a hard question. A lot of it depends on Diddy's situation, the individual facts of each case, and the strength of the claims in each case, and whether or not he could defend himself. Claims more recent, there's going to be proof and evidence. So if someone's adamant that they are not guilty and they did nothing wrong, well, presumably there'd be documents, witnesses, texts where you could vindicate yourself. Unlike being accused of something that happened 30 years ago, chances are the evidence is going to be slim, and it's going to be one person's word against another person's word. And it's difficult for both sides in that situation. So something that happened long ago, you may be more inclined to settle rather than contemporaneous issues. You may be more inclined to fight. But when you have criminal charges looming over you, it's probably best to try to settle everything if you can, because if you have a lot of money, you could perhaps settle cases and make them go away, which seems a lot better than jail time.
Let's pause this P. Diddy story for a quick second to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime news package. It's stories like this that remind you you never know what's going to happen, and the world is an unpredictable place. So when you're hurt, it can be confusing, it can be scary, and you don't really know where to turn. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less on your phone and find out if you have a case. If you do, your injury could be worth millions. In the past couple of months, they've gotten verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, and $6.8 million in New York. Also, they have over 1,000 lawyers, so you know you'll be in good hands. So if you're interested, you can start by easily submitting a claim at www.forthepeople.com/LCnews or by dialing #law, that's #529 on your phone. All right, let's get back to that story. That leads us to the future of this case and the final revelation. We already know Cassie is working with the feds, but experts in the dock say Cassie's testimony and the testimony of other survivors could be vital to the case. I spoke to former FBI agent Bobby Chacon about this. Could she still testify against him, still speak with investigators?
Yeah, she could. She could certainly, and because the NDA is simply between Diddy and her, or their parties there too, the lawsuit, and so the government is not parties to that, and so she could testify, and then Diddy, even if he wanted to, could sue her civilly again for violating the NDA. But people violate their NDAs every day, and then he has a civil remedy to go back after her, but her criminal testimony in a grand jury or a trial would still be valid. I mean, you can't discredit somebody with an NDA. You can actually go after them civilly for violating the NDA that you have with them. But their testimony, even if it's in violation of the NDA, is still credible if you can back it up with other independent corroborative sources. So, I think she could certainly, violate the NDA. The government could possibly make a deal with her for her testimony. But yeah, she could violate the NDA. It's only between her and Diddy, and then he has a civil case to go after her.
So why haven't charges been filed against Diddy? Law and Crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman explains. I'm assuming that prosecutors are going to wait until they have all of their ducks in a row before they bring the charges, just to make sure that there's something that would stick. So is that a reason why things could be taking longer rather than them just rushing to indict?
So, yes, remember when the feds take on a case, they do not like to lose. I mean, no one likes to lose, but they want their ducks, as you said, in a row. They want their case airtight. And by the way, don't forget, I'm confident that attorneys for P. Diddy are reaching out because they don't want anything coming down the pike. And they would like to find ways to avoid that as well, or put something on their radar to say, this person's not credible, this person's not credible, this is the reason why you shouldn't believe that person. So I think any type of real federal investigation takes time.
But if those charges do come down, there are a lot of options as to what Diddy could face.
I think we'll be looking at definitely narcotics charges because of the fact cocaine seemed to feature very prominently in all the legal filings. I think it's going to be around human trafficking or sex trafficking, basically, because again, you're moving people from one state to the other for the purposes of sexual gratification, right? And without their consent, and who knows if folks were underage. Like, again, we're still all finding out all of the details. So again, the investigation's ongoing, so we don't know where this may end. But those are the top charges I'm thinking of. There could be firearms charges, again, depending if guns were brought across state lines and the people who were bringing them were not licensed or something along those lines. So those are the things that I'm thinking will end up showing up in a federal indictment.
Here's what we've heard from Diddy's side of things. In regards to the federal raids, Diddy's team released a statement calling it, quote, a gross overuse of military-level force, saying there is no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated. In response to Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy's team says in part, quote, his reckless name-dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. Diddy's most recent statement comes from a social media post dating back to late 2023. It reads, quote, enough is enough. For the last couple of weeks, I have sat silently and watched people try to assassinate my character, destroy my reputation, and my legacy. Sickening allegations have been made against me by individuals looking for a quick payday. Let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. I will fight for my name, my family, and for the truth. Those were the top 8 bombshells revealed in the Downfall of Diddy documentary. Keep checking back here for all the latest Diddy updates as they unfold. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.